Okay, now we're ready to have the next one is the keynote speech. Before we do that, let me introduce the speaker. He is the president of Project on Fair Representation, a non-for-profit legal foundation. Since its inception, the project has provided counsel in dozens of lawsuits, 5 of which was argued before U.S. Supreme Court. That's impressive. Most of lawyers, constitutional lawyers, probably in their lifetime only have 1 or maybe 2 argued in front of the Supreme Court. So that's a heck of an achievement. And let's see where. He is the author of a book, Law Review articles, essays, and dozens of op-eds in publication, including the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and Los Angeles Times. Since 2005, he has been a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He is also the founder and president of Students for Fair Admissions. We all say SFFA, so the full name is Student for Fair Admissions, a nonprofit membership organization with over 20,000 members. That's impressive, 20,000 members. Founded in 2014, the mission of SFFA is to end the use of racial and ethical classification and preference in college admissions. Let's put our hands together for Mr. Edward Bloom.
Wow, this is my 3rd presentation to the Silicon Valley Chinese Association. Jason is part of a leadership of an organization that has been critically important to Students for Fair Admissions. 2 others, Alex Chen, as Jason pointed out, former president of the Silicon Valley Chinese Association Foundation, was on our board. Crystal Liu, who is active with SVCA, I think as past president, she has been incredibly helpful. So let me tell you just how helpful SVCA has been. When we filed our lawsuit against Harvard and the University of North Carolina in 2014, we filed as a membership organization. That is, the young men that were rejected from Harvard and the young men that were rejected from the University of North Carolina are not the named plaintiffs. You don't know who they are. You will never know who our students are. When we filed, we were able to come out here to SVCA a few months after we filed our lawsuit in November of 2014, and we only had, as an organization, maybe a couple of 100 members. Of those couple hundred, one was a rejectee from Harvard, one was a rejectee from the University of North Carolina. But after our talk in 2015 at the Silicon Valley Chinese Association, within 48 hours, Students for Fair Admissions added 15,000 new members. 15,000. We went from practically nothing to 15,000, all because of the work done by the members of Silicon Valley Chinese Association. Now, how you guys did that is a mystery to me. You probably had some secret way of going online to your contacts and saying you need to join. It cost nothing back then, so all that we needed to know was your name, your email address, and your zip code. You became a member. Today, we levy a $10 lifetime membership fee. So if you haven't joined Students for Fair Admissions yet, I encourage you to do that. You can do that online. Your name will never be made public. Your name, just as the names of our 20,000 other members, will never be sold to some advertising agency. No one will know who you are. Likewise, if you have a student who is a rising senior this year, we encourage you to ask those students to don't be afraid of applying to Harvard and Yale and the University of North Carolina and Princeton and Duke. Apply, and if you're rejected, let us know. So, I want to tell you a little bit about, the last time I was out here was in 2018. So it was before our trial in the Harvard case. So let me just briefly tell you a little bit about that trial. So that trial took place in Boston in October of 2018, and it lasted 3 weeks. We had 15 full days of testimony. Those 15 full days were preceded by about a year and a half of what lawyers call the discovery process. By that, lawyers mean that we got to interview Harvard's admissions officers. We got to interview deans at Harvard. Harvard, likewise, got to interview us. But the most important thing that, pardon me, that came out of that discovery was we were given the admissions data for 4 years leading up to our lawsuit in 2014. That admissions data included the information on about 160,000 applicants. 160,000 data points. This is Silicon Valley. You guys can only imagine how excited our empirical analysts were to have this information. This information included the race and ethnicity, pardon me, of every applicant. It included GPAs. It included SATs. It included ACTs. It had, you know, a very fulsome amount of empirical data. And specifically, here is what we discovered. We discovered that Asian American applicants as a whole are stronger on all objective measures than any other racial group, including the following: test scores, academic achievements, and extracurricular activities. Next, Asian Americans statistically suffer a significant penalty relative to other racial groups in 2 of the most important ratings that Harvard assigns: the personal rating, and I'll talk about that more in a few minutes, and the overall rating. Next, we discovered that race plays the predominant role in admissions decisions. Race is not a factor of a factor of a factor, but the predominant role. And finally, Harvard systematically balances its incoming freshman class to achieve a specific racial and ethnic percentage. In other words, Harvard has racial quotas. So let's consider an example of an Asian American applicant to Harvard. That Asian American applicant in this example, and this is what we showed to the court, that Asian American male who is not disadvantaged, based upon academic and extracurricular data, has about a 25% chance of being admitted to Harvard. So let me make sure I'm telling you this so that you understand. Let's consider the example of an Asian American Harvard applicant who is male, not disadvantaged, and has other characteristics that result in a 25% chance of admissions. Got it? Everybody got it? Changing that applicant's race to white, holding all other factors the same, increases that white applicant's chance of admission to about 36%. Changing the race of that applicant, holding everything else the same, to Hispanic results in a 77% likelihood of admission. And finally, changing that applicant's race to African American results in a 95% chance of admissions. That is not a light thumb on the scale, ladies and gentlemen. That is a dispositive factor in whether you're going to be admitted to Harvard or rejected from Harvard. Asian American applicants to Harvard as a group have, on average, the highest objective academic credentials. In the 160,000 person data set that we analyzed, Asian American SATs are approximately 25 points higher than white applicants. They are approximately 154 points higher than Hispanic applicants, and not quite 218 points higher than African American applicants. This is in the SAT test. Yet as a group, despite being more academically qualified than whites, blacks, and Hispanics, Asian American applicants have by far the lowest admissions rate. In fact, the data produced by Harvard shows that this has been true every year from 2000 until 2019. If Harvard relied exclusively, and we're not advocating that Harvard should rely exclusively on academic credentials. That's not our fight. Our fight is about race. The next fight may be about academic credentials, but that's your fight. If Harvard relied exclusively on the pure academic index it uses, the Asian American share of incoming freshmen to Harvard would likely exceed 50%. So now let me talk about what we discovered as the scandal in all of this. And I am not alone in telling you it was a scandal. It made the front page headlines of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe. It was reported on television. And here is the scandal. I think you know what the scandal is. Harvard rates Asian Americans on a personal rating scale as they do whites, blacks, and Hispanics. Asians consistently are given demerits for their personality scores. On the personal rating, Asian Americans received the lowest scores. In other words, Asian Americans are judged as less, these are not my words, this goes into the personality rating. Asian Americans are judged less likable, personable, and kind. They have low scores on leadership capabilities and courage. And this is deeply, deeply troubling, not only to students for fair admissions, but to all of America that has followed these cases as they work their way through the courts. But as Jason pointed out, this is not a new phenomena at Harvard and other Ivy Leagues. Back in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s, Jewish applicants were treated the same way. Remember, back in the early 1920s, Harvard, even though Jews made up only a little less than 2% of the American population, in the early 1920s, Jews made up nearly 25% of Harvard's incoming freshman class. 25% from a religious minority as small as less than 2%. What did Harvard do? Harvard initiated something called holistic admissions, where not test scores, other than just test scores and grades, they introduced the analysis of the individual, whether they were likable, whether they had leadership capabilities. Guess what happened the year that Harvard introduced holistic admissions back in the 1920s? Jewish enrollment collapsed. Jews back then suffered what Asian Americans today are suffering at Harvard and really, truly, most of the Ivy League. So in 1993, the data that I'm about to present now gives you an idea of how steady Asian applications and admissions rates have been to Harvard. In 1993, 20% of Harvard's incoming freshman class were Asian. 10 years later, in 2003, that percentage had dropped to not quite 17%. About 10 years later, in 2014, the year we sued Harvard, Asian Americans were admitted at a rate of 17.5%. So over a 20-year period, Asian admissions rates to Harvard were flatlined. During this period of time, the number of Asians applying to Harvard and other Ivy League schools was rising dramatically. So you've got a larger number of Asian American applicants, yet year after year it bounces between 17, 18, 19, 17, 18, 19. That, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who study data here in Silicon Valley, know that suggests a quota. Well, as I mentioned, we sued in 2014. Guess what has happened to Harvard's Asian admissions during the course of this litigation? Anybody want to guess? What's happened to Harvard's admissions? Went up. A few weeks ago, just a few weeks ago, Harvard announced the class of 2026 will be 27.9, call it 28% Asian. That is an increase of 60% from the year we sued. Now, that's good news, but how did that happen? This is, I don't know the legal term for this, but if you trip in a pothole on a, I said the word trip and you fell. Yeah. If you harm yourself because of something that the city of Sunnyvale did irresponsibly, if you're walking down the street and the city of Sunnyvale failed to fill in a pothole, and you fall in the pothole and break your leg and sue Sunnyvale, Sunnyvale basically, like Harvard, over the last few years, has filled in the pothole and said, there's no pothole now. Oh my God, 28% of incoming Asian or incoming Harvard freshmen are Asian. What's the problem? Well, we know what the problem is. The problem has been in place now for close to 30 years. So as you know, as Jason mentioned, in January 24th of 2022, the Supreme Court agreed to hear our appeal. Remember, we lost at the district court in Boston. We lost at the First Circuit Court of Appeals, and we appealed to the US Supreme Court. They accepted the case. It is our hope that when arguments take place, we think now probably in November, that the Supreme Court will overturn its earlier decisions allowing race and ethnicity to be a factor in college admissions, and that once and for all, each individual student will be judged on his or her academic achievements, extracurricular activities, personality, but not the color of their skin or their ethnicity. Thank you very much.
You want, yeah. Okay. You can say it for a while. Thank you, Mr. Wu. Very interesting. So this United States of America, it's a law. It's what we call the. We're governed by the law. So when there's a lawsuit hanging over your head, you behave, right? So that's what I call the Sunnyvale pothole theory. So from this point on, so it's very interesting. And that lady, you made a history as the documentary that will show that's actually from that incident. I hope you well, certainly.